Hello, thank you for joining us for the 11th FKMCD Oxitec Public Educational Webinar. Our topic today is a roundtable discussion about controlling the Aedes aegypti, the vector of dengue, Zika, heartworm, and other diseases. We have a big group today. Our panelists include Andrea Leal. She's the Executive Director of the Florida Keys Mosquito Control District. We have Dr. Mark Whiteside. He is the Medical Director of the Florida Department of Health in Monroe County here in the Florida Keys. We have Dr. Doug Mader, a veterinary specialist, also here in the Florida Keys. Ms. Adrian Rogers, the Executive Director of Pasco County's Mosquito Control District. We have Dr. Rajiv Vaidyanathan. He is the Director of Oxitec's U.S. Operations. Dr. Nathan Rose, Oxitec's Head of Regulatory Affairs. And I'm Meredith Finsom, a Florida native and Oxitec's Head of Public Affairs, now living in the Florida Keys. We're hosting the series of public educational webinars to share information with residents of the Florida Keys and to provide a forum to answer questions. Webinars are open to everyone. Our webinars are recorded and made available for everyone after the event. All questions relating to the webinar topics, we do ask, especially since we're having so many webinars, this is our 11th, we ask that everyone keep their questions relating to the webinar topic for today, and we will answer those questions. We may group some similar questions together. If time runs out, we will accept questions in writing via florida@oxitec.com. We'll also publish the slides, the recording from this webinar, and then the questions and answers with links to external resources afterwards, and that'll be on keysmosquitoproject.com. Also just want to remind everyone of our webinar coming up in March. It's community partnerships and the role that communities play in our pilot project. So our agenda is we're doing a very brief slide presentation. We're hoping to keep it to about 10 minutes. We'll spend up to 20 minutes on a roundtable discussion, and then we'll reserve the last half of the webinar for questions, and we'll answer questions from the audience. And now I'll turn it over to Andrea for the next couple of slides. Andrea?
Thanks, Meredith. One of the things we like to start with in all these webinars is just to really touch base on why Aedes aegypti control is so important in the Florida Keys and why we continue to look for new ways to control this particular mosquito. So it all really dates back to 2009 and 10 when we saw locally acquired cases of dengue fever in Key West. And in those 2 years, we saw just under 100 cases. Fast forward now to 2020, and we saw 67 cases of locally acquired dengue fever in Key Largo. So, even with all of the control methods that we have in place, we still have this potential for disease transmission. And this disease is caused by a mosquito called Aedes aegypti. Not only does Aedes aegypti transmit dengue, but it also can transmit Zika, chikungunya, and yellow fever. One of the things that we're concerned with here in the Florida Keys is we have seen an increased resistance to certain insecticides that we use in mosquito control with Aedes aegypti specifically. So again, all of the different tools that we have, we're still seeing a number of these mosquitoes, and that's really why we look at innovative ways, new ways to increase our control of Aedes aegypti specifically. So one of the things we look at as we move forward with any new product is really what's the environmental impact. We're located in a very sensitive environment surrounded by protected marine sanctuary, and we want to make sure that whatever we're doing, we're protecting the integrity of where we all live. And that's one of the nice things about looking at, this particular technology is it's species specific for Aedes aegypti mosquitoes itself, and doesn't have any harmful impacts on non-targets. Next slide, please. So again, we're really focusing on Aedes aegypti itself. There are over 40 different species of mosquitoes that are found in the Florida Keys, and Aedes aegypti is really our highest concern. And this particular species is not native to the Americas. It originated in Africa. Sometime around the 16th century was brought over and really has spread throughout the world, causing disease outbreaks and continuing to cause disease outbreaks to this day. So, this particular species is a very small percentage of our population here in the Florida Keys, but again, causes almost all of our public health issues. And I think with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Nathan at this time.
Thanks, Andrea. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes just refreshing on what Oxitec's technology is and how it works, for those who maybe haven't seen one of our webinars before. We release male Aedes aegypti mosquitoes that carry 2 additional genes. One of those genes is a self-limiting gene, which causes the death of all of the female offspring of the mosquitoes that we release. So we release male mosquitoes, they fly out, they find wild females to mate with, and all of their female offspring die. And it's the females that bite and can actually transmit these diseases. The males cannot bite. Our mosquitoes also have another gene in them, which is a fluorescent marker gene, which means that all the mosquitoes that we release are traceable in the field. These mosquitoes are self-limiting in the environment. They will not persist for very long after the releases end. They give targeted species-specific suppression, as Andrea said, and they are safe, they're non-toxic, non-allergenic, and they have demonstrated effectiveness in several seasons of releases in Brazil, which I'll talk about on the following slide. And the way we release these mosquitoes is shown on the bottom left. We have mosquito release boxes. We take these mosquito eggs, we put them in the box, we add some diet and some water, and after about 10 days to 2 weeks, we have our male mosquitoes starting to come out of those boxes in the field. Next slide, please. So this slide just gives a little bit of data from our field trials in Brazil, which preceded this project in Florida. So when we released our male mosquitoes, we saw that within about 3 to 4 weeks of releases, we started to see significant suppression of the wild Aedes aegypti population. And within about 3 months, we'd suppressed that population by more than 90% by releasing these male mosquitoes. And this project was done in a city in Brazil called Indaiatuba, just outside of Sao Paulo, which has very high mosquito pressure and endemic dengue as well. And throughout this project, we had only males released, no females at all, and very effective suppression of the wild population. Next slide, please. The question we often get asked is whether the mosquitoes that we release will bite people, and the answer is no, because we're releasing only male mosquitoes. They don't have the mouth parts actually to bite anyone. It's only female mosquitoes that can bite and therefore transmit diseases. And the next slide, please. And this slide here just gives a sense of the project timeline. Right now, we are in the pre-season phase in Florida. There's a lot of community engagement work going on right now. We're also training our staff and preparing for the actual project, and pre-release monitoring of the wild mosquito populations will begin fairly soon. In the mosquito season itself, we'll be releasing our mosquitoes and at the same time monitoring the mosquito population using a variety of traps which are placed in the field. And then after we stop releases of our mosquitoes, we will continue to monitor the wild mosquito population for several months afterwards to monitor the disappearance of the mosquitoes which we have released. Okay.
Thank you, Nathan. Just to quickly review some of the community engagement efforts that Nathan mentioned. Community engagement looks different during COVID. We're doing this public educational webinar. We've done many others and have produced a virtual tour of our production facilities in 3 countries. Last month in January, we began going door to door. So we are going throughout neighborhoods in the Keys and giving information and answering questions about our project project. We're also starting to do community events. We were at Key West Garden Fest on Saturday, and we've just installed a project billboard. Another thing that we've launched, because we were getting a lot of questions from Florida Keys residents about how they could become involved in the project and host a mosquito box or a trap or even volunteer or just receive updates. So on our keysmosquitoproject.com webpage, there is a tab where you can join the project if you're interested. And we encourage all of you who are interested to do so you can be involved. With that, we'll fast forward a few slides and turn it over to Dr. Doug Mader to talk about Aedes aegypti and heartworm. Dr. Mader?
Dr. Mader, I think you're on.
Pardon? We all talk about the concern that we have with Zika and Dengue and chikungunya and other viruses, but as a veterinarian, I also want to bring up a very important part of the family, and that is our pets. And it's something we don't hear a lot about is the relationship between mosquitoes and a heartworm, which is a pathogen carried by mosquitoes, which is lethal to pets. Next, please. So American Heartworm Society does frequent screening, and they published this map in 2019. Next, please. And right there's Florida Keys, and you can see, next, go back one. The graphics didn't transfer. Okay, you can see that's where the Florida Keys are, but what I want to point out is we're in the range of 26 to 50 cases of heartworm per year per clinic. Now, remember that Andrea just talked about 67 cases of dengue last year in people. We're seeing 26 to 50 cases per clinic, and with 12 clinics in the Florida Keys, that's 300 to 600 cases of heartworm a year in our family pets. That's a tremendous amount of disease, and sadly, a lot of those animals don't make it. So 300 to 600 cases a year, that's a significant amount of disease carried by the mosquito. Next, please. So just a real quick review. The dog is considered the main host for heartworm disease, and only the female mosquitoes bite. So remember, when we release the male mosquitoes, they don't bite, so they're not going to be a vector for heartworm disease. So it's only the wild female mosquito that bites, and when it bites an infected dog, it then picks up the infected larvae from that dog. Next, please. The larvae develop inside the mosquito. It takes a few weeks to develop, and once the larvae develop to a certain stage where they're infective, then that mosquito then bites another dog or a cat. Next, please. And that's how it's transmitted to the family pet. Now, typically it's a disease of dogs, but we do see it in cats. We also see it in ferrets, and we see it in a handful of other animals too, but primarily dogs and secondarily cats. And once it gets into the dog and the cat, then in about 6 to 7 months, the larvae develop into adult worms. Next, please. And these adult worms can grow up to a foot long, and you can have dozens and dozens of these worms that grow inside the heart and block the major structures of the heart and the major vessels in the heart, and that can lead to heart failure and death. Next, please. And studies that have been done have shown that in heartworm endemic areas, as many as 70% of the mosquitoes that are trapped and examined carry the heartworm pathogen, the heartworm parasite. And of course, the more mosquitoes you have, which we get in springtime and summer with the rains, the greater the risk is to your family pet. Next, please. And again, I just wanted to point out that it's the female mosquito that carries the heartworm larva. It's the female mosquito that does the biting. It's the female mosquito that's the bad character in this play. The male mosquito does not bite, does not spread heartworm disease. Next, please. So I just wanted to end up, if you catch heartworm disease early enough in dogs and cats, you can treat it, which is good. The big thing is it's fairly expensive to treat, because you can imagine these animals, their hearts are loaded with parasites, and it's not like giving them a shot and they go home. They're very, very sick animals, and if not caught in time and not treated properly, it can be lethal. And then one more slide. Oh, you lost my last graphic. It's okay. It's clearly easier to prevent than it is to treat. So it's much better if we can stop the release of the female mosquitoes, the ones that are doing the biting, and get this under control in advance. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Mader. We'll now turn it over to Rajiv to launch our roundtable discussion. And I think I'm going to take these slides down so we can see everyone.
Sure. Can you hear me okay, Meredith? It's okay? Good.
Yes.
We'll set it for about 20 minutes. And I was wondering if we could go around the table. I see you arrayed in a certain way on my screen. And I was wondering if we could allow Adrian Rogers, Dr. Mark Whiteside, and Dr. Doug Mader to say a few words about where they're from, what their interest is in specifically with Aedes aegypti, and why they've come from very different backgrounds, why they've chosen to participate in a roundtable discussion with the Florida Keys Mosquito Control District and Oxitec today. And I see Adrian is first in my little screen there. Adrian, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind starting us off. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience with Aedes aegypti. And I'll mute myself. I ask that others mute while the speakers are speaking.
Very good. Thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Adrian Rogers. I originally started my career in Florida mosquito control, serving as a a research and surveillance entomologist in operational mosquito control. So I've got a background in operational mosquito control, but then also a master's degree in entomology. About 8 years serving on that side of the industry, and then I moved up to Tallahassee to accept a position as the state's medical entomologist and bureau chief for the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and the subject matter expert on mosquito control for the state of Florida. While there, I was able to expand the capacity for direct support to mosquito control programs, and I created and led a team of 6 regional entomologists that was responsible for providing direct support and technical expertise to the mosquito control programs throughout the state. I was there during the Zika outbreak in 2016 and 2017 for the state of Florida, and being at the Department of Agriculture as a state's medical entomologist, I was in a very unique position to analyze mosquito control capacity and to help in providing technical training and direct support for the programs to be able to perform targeted surveillance and control activities for the primary Zika vector, which of course in Florida is Aedes aegypti. And really just to ensure that every county in Florida had the capacity to respond should there be an introduction of a case of Zika or locally acquired cases. So there, my team worked to train personnel across the state in species identification, specific surveillance methods that were targeted at Aedes aegypti, and control measures that were appropriate for the species. We held a series of regional workshops around the state for mosquito control programs, along with pest control professionals. We participated in meetings with county commissions, town hall meetings, City of Miami Beach during the outbreak, hosted webinars for beekeepers and Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, Department of Health, state and national emergency management personnel to be able to respond should they have an introduction of Zika, the National Association of Cities and Counties. We performed outreach to lien holders for vacant and foreclosed properties. I've also served as on the advisory council to the Commissioner of Agriculture, the state's Surgeon General with the Department of Health, as well as former Governor Rick Scott in guiding policy decisions during the Zika outbreak in Miami-Dade County, along with experts from the CDC, from the University of Florida's Medical Entomology Laboratory, and professionals at Miami-Dade Mosquito Control. Additionally, I've served as the chair of the Florida Coordinating Council on Mosquito Control, which is comprised of 12 federal and state partners that serve as advisory council for mosquito control in Florida. We work to create guidance documents that are specific to surveillance and control of Aedes aegypti in the state of Florida. Also to secure emergency Zika virus grant funding to help build capacity for the mosquito control programs to better respond in controlling Aedes aegypti throughout the state. So really that's what my interest is here. I certainly have been following this project since its inception when I was in the Keys in 2009 and 10 with the dengue outbreak. So I've certainly been involved to some extent in various capacities, both locally and at the state level, in trying to get this technology underway and approved here for use in Florida. So, I'm just happy to be here and help answer any questions that you guys might have.
Thank you, Adrian. That I think that goes a long way toward the credibility. I mean, your intervention against Aedes aegypti transmitted viruses, including dengue and Zika, speaks to the challenges, the unique challenges that Florida faces in, first of all, trying to control the vector, and then certainly trying to respond when there is an outbreak. So I'd love for us to come back to that and hear some of the challenges in particular in Miami. But for now, I will, let's see, we have Dr. Mader next. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind telling us a bit about your background. Certainly, Dr. Mader just presented on dog heartworm. And so we'd like to know about where your interest is and why you are joining this panel today.
Sure, Ajib. Thank you again for the opportunity. I'm a true conch. I was actually born in the Florida Keys, and it's my backyard. I love my community. I love the environment, and I care about everything. I care about the people, the animals. I also care about chemicals that are put in the environment. So anything that's put in the environment is going to damage our fragile ecosystem. So it's important to me. I look out the window and I feel like, this is my home. From a scientific perspective, just to give people some background, I'm not just a veterinarian. I'm also a scientist. I have 2 master's degrees. I'm on the adjunct faculty at 2 veterinary schools. I've published 4 medical textbooks, over 36 peer-reviewed research papers. So I am capable of objectively assessing the literature and making conclusions and not being swayed by subjective opinion. So I feel like I have a lot to offer. But most importantly, and the reason I get up in the morning is because I care about this human-animal bond. My goal is to keep animals alive, whether it's somebody with their pet puppy or whether it's Meredith out looking at a bald eagle flying by that I know I fixed the broken wing on. It's that human-animal bond that to me is so important. And last year alone, I lost over 50 patients to West Nile virus just in the Upper Keys. So I've seen it in dolphins. It's been reported in sea lions, although I haven't seen that here. We've seen it in raptors, several raptor species, in pet bird species. We've had a death in a cat, a death in a dog confirmed with West Nile. So all of these mosquito vector-borne diseases are significant to what I do every single day. And when I had the opportunity to join up and get involved and help, as I said before, prevention is always better than treatment. And anything I can do to help get involved and make the world a better place, I want to be part of it. So thank you for the opportunity.
That's fabulous. I think the audience now may be more familiar with the word zoonotic, right? I mean, before 2020, people didn't really, there wasn't a popular usage of zoonotic disease in the popular literature and in the media. And what that really means is that a disease that is found principally in animals, circulates in animals, and then is incidentally introduced into a human population, hence the ZOO, the zoo in front of it. West Nile virus is a zoonotic disease. as is coronavirus, right? As is COVID-19. And mosquitoes.
Enough, Rajiv, so is heartworm. There have been several cases
and so is
of
heartworm,
in
absolutely.
humans that they've picked up from dogs. Although it's extremely rare, it can happen.
That's right. And so many of these zoonotic diseases are also vector-borne, right? So whether it's mosquito or tick-borne, Aedes aegypti is an important vector of zoonotic diseases into a human cycle. So thank you, Dr. Mader, and we'll come back. Dr. Whiteside, and can the rest of us please silence the mics? Thank you.
Yes, again, Mark Whiteside. I'm a physician trained in infectious tropical disease. I've lived in Key West since 1987, been medical director of the county health department here, Florida Department of Health in Monroe counties for probably, I guess, well over 12, 13, 14 years, but always associated with health departments of South Florida from Dade to Palm Beach County and down here in Monroe. In the last many years I've been doing this. I trained in infectious disease in Miami, 1982, got involved in AIDS work. That's the main thing I tell people. I've done AIDS, HIV AIDS work, clinical work and research for 40 years, so I'm an old timer, a dinosaur. And I've had a long-standing interest in arboviral disease, really since that time of my training. And believe it or not, myself and my partner at the time were interested in arboviruses as maybe cofactors or even causes of immune suppression, and even AIDS, even before HIV. The retrovirus was discovered as the primary cause of AIDS, and we did a number of serosurveys. We were also very interested in arboviruses as potential cofactor in other diseases, including hepatitis C. But since that time, I've worked in a lot of the hot zones, including of not only HIV and AIDS, but other things in our poorest communities, from Belglade to Little Haiti in Miami, and down here to the Keys. We've done great with HIV/AIDS, as you know, in the Keys in South Florida for many years. The vast majority of our patients are well controlled. Since I do all things medical, and basically since working here at the health department, I've done work with arboviruses off and on, and of course during the outbreak of dengue we had right here in Key West in 2009, 2010, I was intimately involved working with the state. Of course, we've always worked closely with Monroe County Mosquito Control. And I was, right up until this, last year when, I made multiple trips to Key Largo. I really enjoy field work and talking to people, and that's kind of my part of my role in all this and really the health department is, community involvement, community mobilization, because I think that's, key to controlling these outbreaks. Probably the number one thing. So, for example, back in 2009, 2010, we developed, along with mosquito control, this what we called ABCD program, Action to Break the Cycle of Dengue, and a lot of that was, centered around, educational programs, and even, going door to door, the boots on the ground kind of thing, and the usual preventive kind of things, Of course, the intact windows and screens, air conditioning, the whole container business, protective clothing, so forth and so on. So that's really the role of the health department when we have these outbreaks, is to work closely with mosquito control in stemming the tide. Like I say, I particularly enjoy the field work, and I've been doing it for 4 decades.
Thank you, Dr. Whiteside. In our panel we have real expertise from mosquito control, Zika, dog heartworm, dengue, and I was wondering, I wanted to just, we have about 6 minutes in this time, if our panelists wouldn't mind, and I might want to again kind of give time to Adrian, Dr. Mader, Dr. Whiteside. Dr. Whiteside, you ended by talking about prevention and community involvement. And I would like each of you to even briefly share with us your experiences. What have been your challenges? Where's your wish list in terms of prevention of Zika transmission, dog heartworm, dengue, and tying that into community engagement? So what challenges have you experienced in trying to prevent each of these respective diseases? And we might start with Adrian.
All right, absolutely. So community engagement is huge in the fight against Aedes aegypti. Controlling Aedes aegypti absolutely requires a fully comprehensive integrated mosquito management regime, which includes public education as a very big factor. Educating the homeowners that they are directly responsible for helping to reduce populations in source reduction and removing or eliminating water holder containers around their home. Aedes aegypti has developed a very strong association with human habitation. So, that's the niche that this species has developed over time. And so asking communities or asking for community participation is a very real challenge, because people just, changing behavior is very difficult. And educating them on the role that they play has been certainly something that we have focused on in the outbreak of dengue and preparation for Zika coming in, and the recent reintroductions of dengue. And this is a constant theme that we certainly come back to. Public perception in the products that we utilize is also a big challenge, because people don't understand the chemistries and the adulticides that we use to knock down the adult mosquitoes. And so, in Miami-Dade in particular, we saw a lot of public resistance to the use of NALED on Miami Beach during Zika. And so just managing what the products are and understanding that, there's a variety of different tools that we utilize. And just because, you see one thing doesn't mean that's the only thing that we're doing. It really is a fully comprehensive, integrated approach that we're taking. And this technology is one of those things.
Thank you. And in talking, thank you so much, Adrian. I want to maybe ride that, what you just said about, integrated mosquito management. It has multiple parts: mechanical and cultural control. Pesticides play a role, certainly. I was wondering, from a veterinary aspect, Dr. Mader, that's a lot more challenging. You might have some success in getting people to tip and toss buckets, not a whole lot, right? Compliance is a real challenge, as both Adrian and Andrea will attest to. How much more difficult is it for a veterinary mosquito-borne disease? Sorry, Dr. Mader, you were on mute. Go on.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to echo what Adrian said. That's key point, is we have to prevent it. With a lot of the vector-borne diseases in animals, there are other things we can do. For instance, with heartworm in particular, there are monthly preventatives that a dog and a cat can take, but it costs money to give them. Also, people have to remember to give them, whether it's once a month, once every 3 months, once every 6 months, depending on the preventative. But a big issue, of course, is that it costs money, and it's education. People sometimes don't understand that you have to spend money to save money or prevent disease. So if we can step in and help by taking this prevention one step earlier, in other words, the prequel, so if we can get rid of the vector that causes the disease that they need to then treat their pets with, or pets for, it just makes it one more tool in our toolkit that we can use to fight potentially deadly diseases. So it can be a challenge. And a lot of things like, we were talking about in humans, you can put on mosquito spray. Well, that's a chemical, and in a lot of the animals that we work with, for instance, cats, you can't put mosquito spray on them because they groom, and you're going to make them sick. So we have challenges there that you don't have in people.
I think those unique challenges really do call for vector control. I mean, vector control has been effective in suppressing West Nile virus outbreaks, dengue outbreaks, and I just don't know what the data are in suppressing dog heartworm outbreaks, right? So I think that's, yep. Oh, you're muted.
About it.
Yeah. I was wondering, Dr. Whiteside, so that brings us close. I'd like Dr. Whiteside to take us out here and comment on your experiences, especially the impact of dengue, because I think a lot of, especially immigrant families from Latin America, Southeast Asia, are intimately familiar with dengue. They've lived from, they've come from communities where dengue is an obvious everyday threat. And it might not be as obvious to our audience today. What is dengue and what are some of the symptoms? And kind of speak to why vector control is such an integral part in dengue prevention.
Well, I think that, and you mentioned there are some hard to reach folks, and we have a very diverse population down here. But I think that one advantage we have is, in the Florida Keys, is everybody can kind of, work together. And I think that since our experience in Key West, there's a pretty growing recognition of some of these viral diseases. But I can tell you, even in 2009, 2010, when we had an outbreak of dengue, mainly in Key West, I gave talks up in the Upper Keys, and they were completely unaware that we had dengue in Key West. So that would be a point I would make. It gets a lot of publicity, and I think, our educational programs and the reporting on this, I think most people have become familiar with, for example, the symptoms of dengue, which is like, a bad flu-like illness. Of course, the old name, break bone fever, feel like your bones are breaking. You may have, significant fever, just aches and pains, feel rotten. As I say, almost nobody dies from dengue, but some people, feel like they wish they were dead. Often a rash. And, in the vast majority, it all gets better. I will say that we were fortunate in the Key West outbreak in 2009 and 2010. Some very sick folks, several hospitalized. I never will forget a woman who had a young child who, after she was hospitalized for dengue, moved out of the Keys. Same kind of thing in the Key Largo area. We had several people with 60 or so, and really that's a point I would make there is, that 60 in reality was a lot more. A lot of people have asymptomatic disease. In fact, no symptoms is the most common thing you see with dengue. It's a small percent that really get the bad symptoms, a smaller percent that get severe disease and require hospitalization. But we did have a number of people hospitalized, but fortunately, no one to date has succumbed to dengue in the Florida Keys through these outbreaks we've had over the years. So that's the good news, and we want to keep it that way. And of course, I agree 100% that prevention is the way to go in most things.
Thank you, Dr. Whiteside. Typically, again, for the audience's sake, the number of cases in dengue are often represented as an iceberg. So the number of cases that you see are the part of the iceberg above the water, and the majority of dengue cases are asymptomatic. In some estimates, 80 to 90% of actual dengue infections could be asymptomatic, and these are the individuals who might still be infectious and act as an infectious reservoir for Aedes aegypti. Thank you to our panelists. This brings us to the end of the roundtable discussion, and I will defer to Meredith to steward us to the next stage, please.
Thank you, Rajiv. We'll go ahead and start our question and answer part of this webinar. Some of you have submitted questions in the chat already. I should have mentioned earlier, if you do have questions you want to submit for us to answer, please do put them in the chat box. You can go ahead and submit them now, and we will take them as they come in. But we're going to start with the questions that we have received already. And the first question is, why can't our traditional tools control dengue and Zika outbreaks. And if we could please ask Andrea and then Adrian to respond to that question.
Sure. So I think at the end of the day, if any mosquito control district that's handling a dengue or Zika outbreak or any disease that is caused by Aedes aegypti, you know, our wish list would be an unlimited number of employees and an unlimited budget. However, that's not the way that it works. You know, traditionally it's door to door. You know, you're doing your best to find every single water source, but even if you're sending out, I think in Key West, we were sending out over 40 of our employees. We've moved all of our employees to Key West, and we still saw disease transmission occurring. We still saw Aedes aegypti numbers, but it's because inherently we as humans may not be able to find every single water source. There's always something that's hidden or something that we cannot find, something that we pass by. So it's very difficult to find every single water source. But if we had an unlimited amount of resources, sure, we could suppress the population in better numbers than we currently can. But unfortunately, it's not a perfect world, and we all have limited resources, and we do our best with the tools that we currently have.
Thank you, Andrea. Anything to add, Adrian?
I'll just echo some of what Andrea said. Aedes aegypti utilizes these very cryptic habitats. You know, so even if we had an infinite number of technicians that were able to go door to door and search for these water holding containers, they're so good at hiding and utilizing these very, very difficult to find containers for oviposition, for egg laying. And so you're never going to find all of them. And yes, you could have unlimited resources and unlimited staff, but there's nothing better at finding an Aedes aegypti female than an Aedes aegypti male. And I think, you know, that's really what this technology highlights, because, you know, they're genetically designed to do that. A technician walking around a yard isn't going to see the little bottle cap that's behind the bush underneath the porch, but an Aedes aegypti male will find that female.
Thank you, Adrian. We'll move to the next question. And the next question, I mean, really, it could go to anyone. So I'll ask for volunteers. But the question is, why did Zika disappear, and will it come back?
I can take a stab at that.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Whiteside.
You know, it's funny. I thought that Zika would only be a year or two phenomenon because, you know, there's only one Zika, basically. Part of my interest in dengue, of course, is the fact that, you know, there's the 4 different serotypes, 1 through 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's why I think that dengue will be around probably indefinitely. And, you know, in that regard, from the beginning, and my interest in the early 80s in dengue was partly because of this, you know, fascinating phenomenon of immunologic enhancement of infection, where antibodies to one subtype over time, as they're in decline, becomes subneutralizing. And then if that person or even infant who's gotten antibodies from their mother gets a different serotype, that's the real potential for more serious disease, which in, you know, highly endemic areas, for example, in Southeast Asia, can lead to the feared form of dengue, which is dengue hemorrhagic fever, which can cause severe disease or death. In fact, a leading cause of death in children in many parts of Southeast Asia. So that's why I always thought Zika would be self-limited, even though it was a bad disease when it was here. And who knows, I mean, some form could reemerge, I suppose. But you know, dengue's been with us for as long as we can remember. It continues to increase. This last year was particularly bad in the Americas. and it ain't going away, basically.
And if I may add to what Dr. Whiteside said, everything is true. And there is value in not singling out what happened to Zika, what happened to dengue. How come I'm not seeing an outbreak this year, right? What you have is a single vector, Aedes aegypti. And this vector, this mosquito, is a competent vector of multiple arthropod-borne viruses or arboviruses like Zika, dengue, chikungunya, and yellow fever viruses. And it's a competent vector of filaria that cause dog heartworm. And so, yes, we can talk around prevention of Zika, prevention of dengue, treatment, and that's a lot of effort on a lot of diseases. At the same time, we cannot ignore vector control. Essentially, you are controlling and reducing the population of the very mosquito that is responsible for transmitting multiple pathogens. So vector control is a critical part of any disease control strategy, especially among zoonotic diseases.
And I'll add to that if there's time.
Of course.
Okay. So historically in Florida, mosquito control programs were founded to combat our main pestiferous species and long-range disease vectors, not Aedes aegypti. It wasn't until very recent years where we really started to focus on even surveillance for this vector. And there's very different methodologies that we utilize that are better targeted to even identify where the species is and what parts of the state this is located and how prolific they are. And in addition to that, Zika virus was first identified back in the 50s, and then we didn't see introductions to the Western Hemisphere until 2016 or early 2015, and we had a completely naive population. Whereas dengue is a little bit different. In addition to what Dr. Whiteside said, was speaking about the different serotypes. It also has been here much longer in the Americas, and we didn't have that with Zika. It was a recent introduction to the Western Hemisphere, so we saw very large outbreaks, and the more people are traveling, they're bringing it. We're getting exotic introductions from elsewhere, and with combining the vector control activities, the increased vector control activities specifically targeting Aedes aegypti, reducing the populations down to a level where they're not able to sustain transmission of the virus. These are all contributing factors.
Thank you, Dr. Whiteside, Rajiv, and Adrian. Our next question is going to go to Nathan. And Nathan, the question is, have you ever seen reductions in disease following Oxitec releases?
Okay, thanks for that question. So Oxitec as a company focuses on controlling the vector which transmits all of these diseases, as everyone has been talking about. So our focus has really been on monitoring the reduction in the population of Aedes aegypti. We as a company don't monitor disease, but in some of the projects that we've carried out in Brazil, particularly on a larger scale, there's a city called Piracicaba, which is just outside of Sao Paulo. The municipality and their health surveillance teams did monitor dengue during our releases in some of those projects. And in the areas where we were releasing our mosquitoes and seeing significant reductions in the wild Aedes population, they also saw significant reductions in dengue incidence in those city neighborhoods. So for example, some of the numbers in, I think it was 2015 or 2016, dengue incidence in the neighborhoods where we were releasing our mosquitoes reduced by about 91%. That was against a citywide reduction in dengue that year of about 50%. So significant increase in disease reduction in the areas where we were actually controlling the wild populations.
Thank you, Nathan. The next question we'll send to Andrea and Adrian, and the question is, can insects other than mosquitoes transmit dengue?
So no, Dengue is a mosquito-borne disease, so that's why we're so concerned specifically with the mosquitoes in the Florida Keys that are able to do so.
Thank you, Andrea. Anything to add, Adrian? Maybe, okay, that's okay. The next question, Dr. Whiteside, we will send to you. And the question is it true that dengue gets worse the more times you have it?
Well, again, that's what I was saying about the 4 subtypes. It's possible. I mean, some people have had dengue multiple times, but generally you can get more severe disease over time, could be months and years, if with exposure to a different subtype. So add antibodies to one subtype's in decline, and you get a second subtype, you know, you can potentially get worse disease, which could lead to the severe form of dengue, which is hemorrhagic fever, which is, you know, bleeding and, you know, leading to sepsis and shock. But you know, we have had some more hemorrhagic fever in this hemisphere, but it's been limited. Most of it is in the endemic areas of, you know, Africa and Asia. But it's, you know, ironically, it's a system in which antibodies see, which is supposed to protect you, ironically, at a low or subneutralizing level, paradoxically makes the infection worse. There may be other viruses that could show this same phenomenon. Some of us are even worried about the coronavirus family in that regard, I might add. Only time will tell us that. But, you know, it's possible, but especially in endemic areas with multiple exposures over time to get worse disease with more exposure to other subtypes. But it would be, it's almost non-existent, let me put it this way, in North America. That's mainly confined to the highly endemic areas, but the highly endemic areas are much of the world now. And with another point I would make with modern air travel, you know, you can get, you know, the hot blood factor, someone carrying dengue in the blood with or without symptoms in a matter of hours anywhere in the world.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Whiteside. The next question we'll send to Nathan, and Andrea and Adrian may have things to add on this one, but Nathan, we will, oh wait, that question, sorry, no, I'm sorry. I think the next question is it's for Doug. And the question is, can my dog get dengue and Zika too? Dr. Mader. Sorry, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. No, that's a really good question. No, they don't. They're very species specific, and dogs and cats don't get those viruses.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question is open. I mean, really anyone I think could answer it. And the question is it possible that other serotypes of dengue could arise? So I guess additional ones beyond the ones that we know about now.
I guess if no one else wants to answer that, I would say I personally think that's unlikely, simply because, you know, those 4 subtypes have been with us globally for many, many years.
And I might also want to, you know, kind of jumping off that, instead of thinking about another serotype of dengue or why, you know, when is our next Zika outbreak, to think more globally about changing ecologies, global climate change, human movement, just as Dr. Whiteside said, you know, you could be in Bangkok in the morning and you could be in Miami by night. All of these factors are really what contribute to the rapid and widespread dissemination of a number of pathogens. Zika, we read about 50 years ago, and then no one really paid attention to it until it started fomenting in Brazil, and then in the Caribbean, and then in Florida. right? So I would encourage the audience to think not in terms of, oh, when's the next dengue outbreak, or how come I'm not seeing Zika in my neighborhood? There are a lot of mosquito-borne pathogens, and Aedes aegypti is a competent vector of a number of them. Adrian used the word cryptic. It stays in cryptic harborages and lays its eggs in cryptic water sites. It tends to feed almost exclusively on humans. It has a very short flight radius, and it's a highly domestic and peridomestic species. In other words, it feeds in and around human homes. So there's so much about it that makes it an exquisite vector of exotic pathogens.
Okay, thank you both. We're going to run through these next few questions. We've gotten a number of questions in the chat that are not related to tonight's topic. We will try to answer those after the webinar on the published Q&A that we do. But for those of you who have really specific questions, maybe even about your property or things about the project, you can also send them to florida@oxytec.com and we'll answer those. You might get an answer faster that way. But for the next question, let's see. This question, well, really it could go to anyone. And the question is, do these viruses originally come from other animals before they spread to humans?
So I might enter into that, and I would really love Dr. Mader to comment on that. Practically every disease that's been spread in humanity originated as a zoonosis, as a disease of animals. And although we talk about Zika today as human to mosquito to human transmission, or dengue as human to mosquito to human transmission, both Zika and dengue originated as zoonotic diseases in non-human primates. So dengue originally was isolated from non-human primates in Southeast Asia. And Zika was first isolated from primates in the Zika forest of Uganda. So they all originated as zoonotic diseases, but the encroachment of humans and the very intimate and close association between Aedes aegypti and human populations globally has enabled that kind of rapid transmission from human to mosquito to human. So from our perspective today, it looks like it's just a human disease. All of these diseases have had their roots as zoonotic cycles or cycles from animal to animal where humans have become incidentally infected.
Thank you, Rajiv. The next question, we'll see if we can't get through a couple more. Dr. Whiteside, it's probably best to start with you on this question. And the question is, does exposure to Zika virus prevent you from reinfection?
I'm sorry, repeat that to Zika, you said?
Yes, the question is, does exposure to the Zika virus prevent you from reinfection?
I would say presumably yes, because again, the Zika virus is the Zika virus, and you make antibodies, and you should have some protection. We're looking at this, of course, with now COVID, just how long these antibodies last, and most of us don't think they last, but a few months. But of course, you have the other part of the immune system, the cellular immunity, which plays a role. Both probably play a role in arbovirus infections. One of the most successful vaccines we have for any virus is the yellow fever vaccine. Yellow fever is a group B, arbovirus similar to dengue, in the Amazon and in Africa. And that's one of the best, vaccines we had for travelers. It would be very effective for 10 years. vaccine, which makes your body make antibodies against the virus. So yeah, antibodies generally are protective, except as we've mentioned in the case of dengue, where they fall off at a certain level or they're non-neutralizing, and they can enhance another strain. But I'm not aware of that with Zika. Now, there are antibodies that can cross-react in the laboratory, which can present problems. Very closely related viruses within groups, like there's A, B, and the Bunyanviridae group of viruses. But for example, in group B, where dengue is, closely related viruses can cross-react in the laboratory.
Thank you very much, Dr. Whiteside. We have a few more questions. We're going to try to get through them, even though we're at time, but we're happy there's interest. Adrian, we'll send the next question to you. And the question is, can one mosquito infect many different people?
That's a great question. One of the additional challenges in controlling Aegypti, and really what makes Aedes aegypti a prominent vector, is the fact that they do what's called skip feeding, or they'll take a small bit of a blood meal from, let's say, one person, and then they'll fly off and take a blood meal of another. And it's that feeding. During that feeding is when they're introducing virus into the next person. So yes, that is possible.
Great. Thank you very much. We're going to do two more questions. The next one is for you, Dr. Mader, and the question is whether humans can also get heartworm disease.
Yeah, that's a very good question. There have been several reports in the literature where humans have picked up heartworm disease. And interestingly enough, it's not the definitive host. It's an incidental host. And oftentimes when humans get it, they can get it in their blood, which eventually ends up in the heart. But oftentimes in humans, they find it under the skin, in an area near where the mosquito bites the actual person and penetrates. The larva penetrates the subcutaneous tissue, then the larva will develop under the skin. Then the person will present with a nodule under their skin. And when they go to the doctor and the doctor cuts it open, they'll find a dog heartworm.
Thank you, Dr. Mader. The last question, Nathan, we're going to send to you. And the question is, can one mosquito carry both Zika and dengue together?
Okay, it'd be great if others want to jump in on this as well. I think it's possible in theory, but it's likely to be a rare event just because of the impact that actually carrying one of these infections has on the mosquito. So I would say it's possible, but probably not that common. But it'd be great to hear from others as well on that.
Nathan, that was the best answer you could have given. Absolutely true, right? And so think about the biology of the mosquito. As Adrian mentioned, female Aedes aegypti do feed multiple times during one ovarian cycle, unlike every other mosquito, which feeds, develops eggs, lays eggs, and then feeds again. And so if any mosquito, if any species were a candidate for multiple infections, it would be Aedes aegypti. And so an individual could feed, for example, on a human who is infected with both dengue and Zika, or feed on one individual with dengue and feed on another individual with Zika. Having said that, there is a burden and a competition of Zika and dengue within an individual mosquito. And so it is not a one-to-one parity of the two viruses in a mosquito. There is a competition. If I remember correctly, dengue actually outcompetes Zika, replicating inside mosquitoes. And so while you can isolate both dengue and Zika from an individual mosquito, that event would be extremely rare simply because of the probability of feeding on multiple hosts and the asymmetrical development of one virus versus the other in an individual mosquito.
Thank you. Thank you for that thorough response, Rajiv. And thank you to all of our panelists for your participation this evening. We really appreciate it. And just want to remind everyone watching, thank you for joining us. And this recording will be available on YouTube and on our project website after the fact. We'll also have the slide presentation available, and we'll publish the list of questions and answers. And if we didn't get to your question, or if it wasn't related to tonight's topic, if you could send it to florida@oxytec.com, and we'll be really happy to respond there. But thank you all, and hope to see you at our webinar in March, if not before.